This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Our subject matter, contemporary spirituality. Our guest today, Jim Burklo. He has been a mindfulness practitioner and teacher for nearly 40 years, and he serves as the Associate Dean of Religious Life at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He is an ordained United Church of Christ pastor. Jim, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our show today.
Thank you for having me.
Jim, let's begin by giving our listeners a little bit about your background and what brought you to the work you're doing and the book that was just published called Mindful Christianity. You, in looking at your bio, you had a rather conventional religious training. You have a master's in divinity from a theological seminary in San Francisco. You were ordained by the United Church of Christ, but you have gone in an unorthodox direction. And I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners are, what that course of evolution was like for you and what moved you in different directions.
Yes, well, in a sense, actually, it's very orthodox to be pursuing mindfulness in the context of Christian spirituality, and that became more obvious the deeper I got into this subject, Phil, as I explored the mystics and the spiritual masters of Christianity afresh and read new ones, new to me, I should say, ones that I had not explored in the past. I became more convicted of that, of the orthodoxy, the deep tradition that surrounds mindfulness within Christianity. But my own path got going around mindfulness when I was in theological seminary. I guess the administration of the San Francisco Theological Seminary divined somehow that I wasn't a terribly conventional type of student, and so they placed me with an even more unconventional student by the name of Ken Meese, and he had spent a year and a half in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Nepal. And he was deep into Buddhist practice, and he told Lama Yeshe, his Lama, that he wanted to be a monk, that he wanted to be a Buddhist. And Lama Yeshe said, well, no, actually what I think you should do, you're an American, you got freckles, go home. Go home, go to a Christian seminary, and be the most enlightened Christian that you can be.
Wow.
Yes, sir, he said, and got himself into the seminary and wound up as my roommate. I go, okay, I think I need to take advantage of this opportunity. So I said, teach me everything. And so every morning he and I would get up first at the crack of dawn. We'd go up to the Christian seminary's chapel with the stained glass streaming through and sit on the floor and do Vipassana meditation. And that got me started on mindfulness practice. And I've been at it ever since, practicing it and teaching it in the context of churches primarily over those years. And then at Stanford University, led a group that did mindfulness practice for years, and now here I am at USC. So when I got here, I immediately, for my own benefit, I need to belong to a group. So if I can't find one, I make one. So I started one here at USC, and then a practice group, and then later my boss and I, Varun Soni, Dean of Religious Life here, decided that we wanted to start a mindfulness program at the university and go big with it. So we now have mindful.usc.edu, and you can look it up and see what we're up to, but we now are training about 800 faculty, staff, and students each year in 5-week mindfulness courses, free courses that we offer on campus. Oh. And it's become a very big deal. So that's just the classes. We also have practice groups. We have research. We have a contemplative pedagogy faculty group, which I co-lead, and it's a pretty robust program. So you know how it is. You teach something, you better know it. So I just got deeper into my practice in the course of all this, and began to reflect on this whole question of how mindfulness shows up in Christian mystical tradition. And that's what led me into the study that led to this book. And I learned so much. It was a really wonderful time of study to prepare for this project.
Jim, I want to ask, you've been at mindfulness for 40 years as a practitioner and teacher. For me, mindfulness has become, the term mindfulness has become more and more popular in the last 10 years. Certainly now it's extremely popular all over. Did you always refer to what you were involved in spiritually as mindfulness, and how would you define mindfulness?
Well, that's a terrific question, and that's an educated question there, Phil, because yes, when I started out, it was just meditation, and it was only later as mindfulness became the coin of the realm, the term of art, if you will, about a very specific kind of secular practice of meditation, that I began to use that term myself. So yes, it represents the secularization of this type of practice. As your book indicates, so masterfully, the practices of the East came to America, and then they morphed as a consequence of their contact with our culture. And secular mindfulness certainly is a representation of that process. So,
Jim, yeah, go ahead.
And that's so. I think the gist of my book is this: that mindfulness has been liberated from religion, as evidenced by that process that you pointed out. Now it's time for religion to be liberated with mindfulness.
I'd love you to expand on that, and maybe this question will trigger an elaboration. Do you think anything is lost when a practice rooted in a venerable tradition like Vipassana becomes secularized and essentially, in many cases, medicalized?
Yeah, nicely put. Yeah.
Do you think anything is lost in that adaptation? And then when it becomes absorbed by a different spiritual tradition, as in mindful Christianity, is anything then changed, lost, or gained?
Well, I would say yes, something is lost, and yes, something is gained. Kind of starting backwards here, I'd say that first of all, the premise of the book is that in fact mindfulness has been in Christianity all along. It's nothing new to Christianity. Awareness of it in the current era is a new thing for a lot of Christian people who simply have no knowledge whatsoever of the incredible mystical tradition of the faith. But once you start looking for it, it's there. Oh, is it ever? And I believe that Christianity and the other religions are very powerful, beautiful, rich containers or vessels for the experience that emerges from mindfulness practice. So you have the Vipassana certainly is in that category of giving a very in the case of Vipassana, it's like that's a rich, deep spiritual psychology that's the huge literature and many manifestations. So it's just it enriches the experience of mindfulness. It contextualizes it in the breadth of spiritual practice. It adds a great deal to have a religious context for it. However, at the same time, the beauty of secularized mindfulness is that it makes it accessible to people who for very good reasons, quite often have phobias about religion or bad experiences or otherwise just it doesn't float their boat, doesn't work for them, this is a way to have the experience in a way that's more accessible, less scary, less freighted, etc. So,
Jim, I have a question along these lines.
Dennis.
The actual practice, the actual meditation would be practiced by somebody that was doing mindful Christianity be any different than the actual practice somebody who was practicing mindful Judaism or mindful Islam or mindful Hinduism or mindful agnosticism? Would the practice take a different flavor or form in any way in any of those?
Another educated question.
Well,
only a practitioner would be able to ask that question.
Yeah.
But yes, it's the answer is it is different in one major regard, and that the way I put it is mindfulness is, again, to give the secular definition, it's mindfulness is awareness in the present moment of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, urges, releasing judgment about those experiences and welcoming them, being open to them with warmth, love, compassion. That's the secular definition. That's the John Kabat-Zinn kind of definition. Now, in my practice, I'll just speak personally, that's exactly what I do. To that, I add another question in this case, and the question is, who is doing the observing? Or what is doing the observing? Now, in the Vedic tradition, in Buddhism, and it would be like, that's the moment when you discover no self, right? You get past the self. In the Christian context, that's when you discover the capital S self, which is not your personality, not your body, not your definition of yourself, not your ego. It's God. It's the divine capital S self that is the essence of your being. And that concept of God, that way of understanding God and experiencing God, of course, has deep roots in the Judeo-Christian, in the Abrahamic religions, certainly, and resonances definitely, obviously, in Hinduism. So theistic religions have a mysticisms, I should say, and you will see this mindfulness experience conveyed through that understanding of mystical theism, where it is God who is doing the seeing, observing, watching with love. And that awakening, the knowing of the knower, the seeing of the seer, that is the moment when you have what the mystics of Christianity call contemplatio. That's when you have union with the divine.
Jim, this is fascinating. In that one answer, you cut to the core of three different traditions, and started to sound there for a minute more like an Advaita Vedantist than a Christian or a Buddhist. And I've always felt people make too much of the division, perceived division between Buddhism and Hinduism, and certainly with Christianity. But that it begs a question. Many times I hear mindfulness practice described. There's a focus on focusing and being present with an experience, which seems to me to be oriented around some object of experience, a sensory object, the breath, whatever. And you talked about what in the Vedic tradition we call the witness of those experiences.
Yes,
so it's a kind of transcendence of the sensory experience. Is that typical piece of mindfulness practice, or is that something that's less common in its usual the usual way it's taught?
Well, I think the witness, taking the position of the witness, is pretty fundamental to secular mindfulness practice. Understanding the divinity of that witness, or the identifying that witness position with in religious terms, that's left out of secular practice, and for good reason. Again, because of people's resistance to religion generally, and the suffering that religion has caused a lot of people. So, entirely understandable why that works better to leave that out for a lot of folks. But within the context of Christianity, it's a pretty central thing. That's the goal state of mystical spirituality and Christianity.
Dennis, can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I follow up on that?
Go ahead, yeah.
I'm curious now where the Christ piece of mindful Christianity comes in.
Right.
When there's parallels here with, and you probably know this, with centering prayer.
Yes.
Where essentially mantra meditation kind of practice was adapted to contemplative prayer, but there's an element of deliberate Christianizing of it.
Yes.
And I wonder if anything similar takes place in the adaptation of essentially vipassana or secular mindfulness practice into the Christian context.
Well, that's a great question. What I would say is that what I discovered in the course of researching for this book is that, in fact, mindfulness is just part of Christian mysticism. It always has been. It's no news. It's just there. It's built in. So there's no adding on, or it's not a matter of Christianizing vipassana here. The actual fundamental essence of vipassana, the kernel concept there is in Christian mystical history. It's no news. As Saint Augustine was a quote attributed to him by Saint John of the Cross and many others. I'm not sure that he actually said it, but he's credited with saying, Lord, let me know myself, and I will know thee. If I know myself, I will know God. And that's all over Christian mysticism. It's like the way to know God is to know oneself. It's woven into the Gnostic tradition very deeply. Gospel of Thomas makes reference to this. That if you don't know yourself, you can't know God. That's knowing yourself leads to the knowledge and the encounter with God. So it's no news.
Yeah, Jim, to follow up on this, well, I assume when you teach mindfulness at USC, where you are the Associate Dean of Religious Life, it is presented in a secular way that anybody could come.
Yep.
Doesn't matter if you believe.
That's right.
Now, if one of those 800 people that you instruct every year were to ask, what's the end goal of this? What would you? How would you answer that?
Well, I say that the goal state of the practice that we do at Mindful USC is awareness of your thoughts, feelings in the present moment, without judgment and with warmth, with love. That's the goal state, and that's it. That's all there is to it. Now, again, I think my viewpoint is that that is exactly what a lot of people need and want. And that's as far as they want to go, and that's hard enough to achieve. It's its own project. It's a real serious discipline to get there and to stay there and to make that part of your life and build it into your way of looking at the world. Now, for some folks who have had a religious background or do have some kind of religious commitment, they begin to ask the question, and this is part of the reason I wrote the book, they began to ask the question, how does this experience that I'm having, how does this fit with my religion, with my spiritual, with my religious tradition, my faith tradition? And that's where this book comes in. It's like, hello, there. You know what? It does fit. It's always fit. It's integral to Christian mysticism all the way back.
And how does the person of Jesus fit in?
Well, Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. You know, today is the beginning of Lent. It's
that's right.
Wednesday. So
I saw people with little black crosses on their forehead. So I remember.
That's right. I got one on my forehead.
Right.
I was out there imposing ashes myself today. So yes, today begins Lent, and we remember Jesus' 40 days in the desert. What was he doing out there in the desert by himself? Now, the gospel myth says that he was tempted by the devil. Temptation in this context is a pretty specific thing about coming to terms with who you are and who you aren't. So Jesus is going through this challenge. Am I Superman? Can I jump off the top of the pinnacle of the temple and not be harmed? Can I turn that stone into bread because I'm hungry? No, I am not Superman. No, I am not my body that is hungry. That's not me. So it's he's going through the via negativa, the negative way of figuring out who he really is, coming to, realizing that his small s self is not really who he is. That's not the center of his life. It's the divine capital S self, at which point he's aware of his divinity and goes on to do his ministry after that time. So this goes all the way back to Jesus. Then you have St. Paul who says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. Galatians 20, verse 2. No, 2, verse 20. Got backwards. Anyway, it is no longer I who live, it's Christ who lives within me. That's mysticism. That's knowing that your true self is the divine. And Jesus got there by what I would call a mindful practice out there in the desert for 40 days.
Very good. Jim, you're also associated with something called progressive Christianity.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that and how mindfulness fits into that?
Yes, I'm very involved in progressivechristianity.org, and I'm also super involved in a group called Progressive Christians Uniting, pcu-la.org. The progressive Christian movement is the idea. It's a perspective on Christianity that says that we're about our deeds and not about creeds so much. We're defined by our deeds and not by dogma doctrine. We're about the religion of Jesus, not so much the religion necessarily about Jesus. We're about practice, about spiritual practice, as opposed to some kind of correct dogma or doctrine. We also, most of us, I think, in this movement have kind of moved beyond the supernatural concept of God. So we're looking at God as one with nature, God as the process of creation and generativity in the universe. So it's a theological perspective. It's a social perspective. Our churches that are part of this movement are fully open and affirming. We do, perform gay marriages and have a big focus on peace and justice and respect for other religions, pluralism toward recognizing other religions are as good for others as ours is for us, or can be at least.
Right.
So the way that fits with mindful Christianity is mindfulness is about paying attention to what is. It's looking at what is with as clear of an eye as we can.
Right.
And if we're looking at what is, then part of what we're looking at is the religion itself.
Mm-hmm.
What is going on with our religion? What is the nature of it? What is the nature of our tradition? and that leads, that kind of searing, honest examination, loving, non-judgmental, a view of our religion that lets go of preconditions and predefinitions leads to an awareness that Christianity is one of many paths to awareness of God, and it is human creation that's constantly evolving and changing, and that's a good thing, and that our scripture is holy because of the intentions we bring to it. It is not to be taken literally. It is to be employed creatively, as the mystics always did in Christianity. The mystics of Christianity had really basically no interest in a literal reading of the Bible at all, ever. And progressive Christianity looks at the Bible that way as well. A rich treasure trove that can be interpreted in many, 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 many ways. So,
Jim, I wanted to ask you, in progressive Christianity, is there a role, if any, for prayer, or would the mindfulness?
Oh, absolutely.
How would prayer be different than the mindfulness practice?
Well, and that's what I reveal in the book is that prayer and mindfulness are the same thing. Mindfulness is prayer. Christian mindfulness is prayer in the sense that the goal state is knowing the knower, is seeing the seer, as Teresa of Avila, the 16th century Spanish mystic, she said, "Mira que le mira," see that you are seen. Know the knower, see the seer. So that is what happens in this prayer in this context, in the context of Christian mystics all the way back, has not been about asking some supernatural deity to intervene on your behalf necessarily. It is about contemplatio, which is the direct experience of union with the divine. So, prayer is elevated beyond putting in a request. It's the actual encounter and awareness. It's the awareness of one's true center of one's being, and communion with that being.
Jim, in Progressive Christianity website and in your personal website on Mindful Christianity, there are at the very least allusions to the inner life of that you're advocating and social justice work and advocacy. You're at a major university, and a very diverse university. Among the young people you work with in the Department of Religious Life, how do you see that generation shaping up in terms of spirituality and their responsibility as citizens?
Well, as we speak, with the beginning of the Trump era, things are changing very, very rapidly in terms of students awakening to the critical requirement of every citizen to be engaged with political life. And I would say that this university kind of tended to have a lot of apathetic students when it came to matters political, but that is rapidly changing, to say the least. So, there's an awakening to the need to be civically engaged, not just in terms of charity, but in terms of social structures, politics, economics, the larger scale forces at work. So students are, more than ever as we speak, trying to find a way to put their faith into action and understand how their faith motivates them to be engaged. And there's a lot going on, much I could discuss there, particularly in the realm of Christianity, because what I hear over and over and over again are students who are evangelical Christians who are just horrified that their parents voted for Donald Trump. So there's a crisis of faith going on among young evangelicals who are, some did vote for, we have students who voted for Trump, of course, but I would say, not many, or percentage-wise, and not even that many of the evangelical Christian students. Their parents voted 80% for Trump, but roughly. But the students, the younger folks, that's not the case. So there's literally a panic among young evangelicals about this. Like, how can I even call myself a Christian anymore if this is what people are doing? And a horror of this. And so, yeah, it's getting people to figure out what their faith has to say about these issues and go deeper and look at it a different way. So I'm having some very, very rich discussions. Now, some of this is already in play, particularly around the gay, lesbian, about LGBTQ, because young evangelical Christians they just don't understand what the big fuss is about gay and lesbian. It's like, so big deal, God made people that way, and what's the problem? But their leaders are still, fighting the culture war on that one. Right. So there's a generation gap within a huge, major tectonic thing going on there, and that leads young people to question everything. Theological, not just the social issues, but look at their theology again in a new way and ask new questions. So it's a pretty intense time right now around those topics.
Right. Jim, thank you so much for your time today. I'd like you to tell our listeners one more time the title of your book, and if any other final points you'd like to make, or Phil, anything else you'd like to ask. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just again, it's Mindful Christianity is the book, and my website, mindfulchristianity.org, which is a portal into this way of spiritual practice. And again, it's the awakening that this mindfulness, as we define it in a secular way, has always been woven into, seamlessly part of Christian spirituality. Rediscovering that, bringing it to light, really creates richness, both for Christianity and also for mindfulness as an experience and a practice itself. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for bringing
Thanks, Jim. Keep up the good work.
All righty. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.